Resto Mod 101.
Brought to you by. Hey, welcome back to Resto Mod 101. Today we're working on our 55 Ford F100 and specifically the hood. We're over here at No Limit Engineering and they have a fantastic reverse engineered hood. This thing actually opens up this way towards you. It gives you a lot more clearance to work in the engine compartment. You never have to worry about your hood blowing up on you when you're going down the freeway, and you don't have to deal with this. That sucks. Here the guys are taking out the hinge bolts that are underneath the hood. There's two on the driver's side and two on the passenger side.
We roll up a towel so it's a little thicker than it normally would be, and we slide it under the wiper to hold it. Now it lays down the cowling, and under the hood, as we take the hood off, if we'd have slipped a little bit, the hood would come back and bump into the towel and it wouldn't hurt any of the paint.
Make sure your buddy helps you lift the hood and flip it over on something that'll protect the paint.
Okay, so I'm taking off the nuts on the outer side, and I gave Mike the difficult job under the dash. Keeps him flexible, makes him young.
There's two studs sticking through. They're again a half-inch wrench will usually fit them, and usually they're not rusted. They come off really easy. They're right behind the emergency brake. Now the other one's going to be a little tougher because it's up high behind the wiring. Because the glove box, we're going to have to use a ratchet wrench. Okay.
There's two hood latches on the front of an F100. There's the primary latch, which closes it and sets the depth of the hood, and there's a secondary or safety latch. Now what this was put in for is in case the primary latch failed, the hood would come up and catch this and it wouldn't fly up and hit the windshield. And some of us know a little bit about that. And our hood comes forward and the hinges lock it in place from not being allowed to lift. And this secondary latch becomes a problem, so we're going to remove it. And the secondary latch just drops out the bottom, but the gaps here with the 54 grill aren't very big, so we just take it all the way out the bottom. We're going to get ready to set the hood back on to test fit the sheet metal and line it up. We lay a couple towels down. We like a thin towel so it doesn't get in the way of the gap, but we want to protect the paint in case we drop the hood. And just set the back down in the pocket first. Set the front down. However the hood fits when you drop it on like this is how it's going to fit when you put the hood hinge kit in. You might be able to cheat it a little bit here and there, but this is how the hood wants to sit. So now we start looking at it. You know, it's pretty close right here. This corner of the hood, this side needs to go forward, away from the cowl, to take care of that gap. As we go forward, if we only move this side forward, the hood's going to start moving over toward the passenger side. This gap will get even bigger. When we come over here, this gap will get tighter, which it's not too bad right now. But this gap is huge.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Here. You can slide your whole finger in there, right? So this side needs to come back.
Which actually will help us with
Might
that side.
help that side a little bit. But as we bring this side back, the front of the hood here, as far as how far out it is, lined up with the fender, the hood might actually be behind the fender. So then we'd have to unbolt the fender from a lot of things and move the fender back. Typically I would start by moving the latch plate around itself on the cowling here. But I think what we're going to try doing is moving the whole front clip over just a little bit. We might be more successful initially with that. It's one of the adjustments you can make. So the core support here, that's a big frame piece underneath, up and behind the grill, is held down to the frame with two bolts. To kind of check the core support alignment, I just visually looked right down the edge of the core support and straight down off that edge to the inside edge of the frame rail here. And I took a look at that and compared it to the other side. What we're going to do is unbolt the radiator and see if we can move it closer to the fan just enough to get a wrench on the two bolts.
Radiator's loose.
We gotta get it moved. Alright. Okay. You got your... So we successfully got the core support to shift over to the passenger side a little bit. We had to unbolt the radiator and move it out of the way to get that done. So we're not quite committed yet that we're all lined up. So I'm going to leave the radiator loose until we're sure that the hood fits real nice. Let's try the hood again. Well, it's a little better. You can tell now I can't get my fingers in here anymore.
That's good.
Right, so we moved it some. The next thing to do is to loosen the top valance, which holds the top of each fender, from the core support itself, which is these 3 bolts on each side. And there's also a bolt here that holds the wind deflector panel, which is this panel behind the grille and the headlight. And it can sometimes hold things up. So we took those bolts out for now and we'll put them back in a little bit. So we're going to loosen up these bolts and try to bring this fender in. Okay, y'all hold it over. Yep. We did manage to get it to move over about 1/8 of an inch. We also loosened up these 3 bolts on each side, which hold the fender to the upper valance panel itself. And we pushed this fender in and we pulled that fender out, trying to get everything to move over a little bit more.
Because we moved the valance around, the holes right here on each side do not line up anymore. So what I'm going to do is take a little grinder and stick it through there and grind the holes a little bit bigger so I can get the bolt through.
Looks like you'd make a good dentist.
Actually, I need to go.
So now we're going to start prepping the inside of the hood for the new hinges.
Okay.
So these 2 brace bars that are inside the hood got to come out. And on the back of the hood, they're simply bolted in. In the front of the hood, they attach to this little bracket here.
Yeah, this one here, right?
Now this bracket has 3 spot welds that hold it to the inner splash of the hood.
Okay.
And you can't see them, right? But we need to drill the spot welds out to get this off, and there's an easy way to find them.
Okay.
And even though this sanding pad looks old and tore up, I actually found that specifically for this task. I'm going to sand the paint off and the little spot weld divots will show up. You see all of a sudden you can see one right here, one there, and one there. And what I do is I drill all the way through with an 1/8 inch bit. So now I've switched to a 5/16 bit. And what I'm going to do is try to drill halfway through so that I'm only drilling through the bracket and not the hood inner shell. I'm going to move to the back side here and take these 2 back bolts out. And then have a thread insert welded in, hopefully. I should be able to just take them out. If you look and see, there's a hole on the back side of this brace where I can stuff my finger in. And if the thread inserts are damaged, then you have to reach in there and find a way to hold on to that deal. Sometimes we reach in there with a screwdriver or needle nose pliers or something. This one's not going to come quite as easy as the last one. And you can see how much that moved.
Yeah, wow.
So this was putting some tension on the hood and holding it in a certain position. So I'm going to grab this one and see it's really in the same condition. I haven't drilled quite deep enough yet. I would rather just go at this little by little, because if I get real aggressive and I do a bunch of damage to this, I'm going to have to fix the damage. You know, you can see that now I can instantly twist it a lot more. So some of the spot weld is starting to give away, and if I just rock it back and forth, I got 2 of them loose. With 2 of them loose, you can rotate it to the side, and that's how it comes off.
So these, get these started out here. two 5/16 fine thread with taper heads. And what that'll do, it'll hold the plate in place until I can go inside and get the other two started. It's almost impossible to see up inside because it's up very high in the cowl, but you can feel the bolt sticking through. Just get your fender washer on there, get the nuts started for the moment. Okay, just barely snug that one down, and we'll snug the bottom one. Okay, there we go, and I'll go to the outside now. And you want the plate so you can move it around just a little bit for alignment purposes. There's no drilling required on these plates. Okay, what we have here are the rollers for the on the hood. Nylon roller here slips over the machine bolt and is held on by one nut. You have to make sure that there's a edge sticking out of the bolt so that the roller doesn't get pinched when it's tightened up. It has to move freely. If there's not an edge on the bolt sticking out, you need to sand this part just a little bit so that you have an edge so it will spin free once it's tightened. And we'll check the other side, make sure. Actually on this one it's about flush, so what I need to do is just sand it just ever so slightly. Take the file, lay it flat, just a little bit, doesn't need to be a whole lot. Check it on the bolt. Need about 10 thousandths clearance there. Alright, I've got it. I sanded the roller here and I want to make sure that it turns real easy. There's no lube required or anything because it's nylon.
So I have what we call the pivot bar. This is the main hinge bar. And then I have two hood brace rods. This is the driver's side, it carries the prop rod. And the passenger side is just clean. In the kit there are 4 3/8 diameter rod ends, and there are 2 little 5/16 rod ends. The 5/16 rod ends will go in the end of the hood brace bar, and we'll screw them in until there's about a 1/2 inch of thread showing. You want to take 2 of the 3/8 bars and put them into the pivot bar like this, with again about a 1/2 inch of thread showing on either side. The last 2 remaining rod ends are these that are pre-assembled in the kit with this hardware on them, and these are going to attach the hinge to the front valance, so we're not going to use those at the moment. Once I have things pre-assembled, I'm going to attach the pivot bar to the hood braces, and we have some spacing, and it seems kind of odd, but we do this on purpose. So there's a 3/8 by 1.5 inch bolt. It's going to slide through from the outside just like I have here. And then on the inside, I'm going to take 3 of the 3/8 washers and put them over the bolt as a spacer. Then I'm going to slide the pivot bar on, and 1 more washer and the nut. And I'm going to duplicate that on the other side. Alright, so now over here at the hood I got my bar assembly with the pivot bar and the hood braces. And I'm going to come in and set those little brackets right up on the front of the hood. And I'm going to bring the back of the hood brace bars back here and set them right over the original 2 thread insert holes. And take a look at them, and it looks like it lines up pretty good. I might need to lengthen this one a little bit. Okay, and I'll use the original 2 bolts that came out, and they're going to go right back in. This kind of feeling, you know, I can push that forward so far and then it doesn't want to go anymore. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing if it's as far forward as it really wants to go, and if I can get it to line up without having to really push on anything too much. This had a little bit of pressure before, so I know it's going to take some now. So I actually am setting this up, so I'm going to push on it, hopefully just a little bit like that, and get my bolt to start. Right now I'm just kind of snugging them up, On final alignment, we might decide that we want to push on the back of the hood or pull it. And then once everything else is in place, we would take these bolts out and adjust the rod end. So until I'm really happy with that, we're going to leave it alone. We got to make sure that this assembly now is perfectly centered up from side to side or center to center between the hood. And if you notice, I can move it back and forth a little bit. You can't just take for granted that it fell in the right spot. So we're going to do some measuring. I'm measuring from the same point on the inner ledge of the hood. So I'm butting the tape measure up against this ledge right here. And I'm measuring out to the edge of this plate. And all hoods are different. So I will tell you that I got it to where it's 5 1/8 on both sides, and I'm really centered up. But that doesn't mean every hood's going to be 5 1/8, because I've seen these hoods be at least a ½ inch different in width. I'm just using a little pair of vice grips to clamp this in place. I move the hinge bar up out of my way, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch bit and drill through these 3 holes. So now that this side is drilled, we'll just take the thread receiver plate and slide it underneath and watch till one of the holes lines up. Move it around till the rest line up and put the other 2 bolts in. Now I'll tighten these up, and you can see that although we took some strength out of the hood when we moved the factory 2 braces, the bracing that we put in is much stronger than what we took out.
The Boy Scout theory, leave it better than you found it.
That's it. Just to make sure that rotates nice, we're in good shape. Our hinge is going to attach to the front valance. What we need is a pair of holes that are 36 inches apart, center to center, basically in the middle of this dimple as close as we can get. The first thing I'm going to do, use the front face of this valance, slide the tape across. I'm not exactly sure how wide it is, so I got this little piece of tape here. I'm going to put a mark at 24 inches. Then I'm going to duplicate this process on the other side as close as I can get to it. Put a mark there as 24 inches. I'll come out here and measure between my 2 marks, which is 1 3/4 inches. And I'll put myself a center mark at 7/8. So 1/2 of 36 is 18. If I go 18 inches out from center, I'll duplicate that on the other side. And even though I have this mark, I'm not going to take out as 100% yet. I'm going to come in over here and try to measure straight across. This side I got about 6 3/4. And this side I'm at like 6 11/16. So I might keep that in mind, that I may want to shift the holes over, it doesn't sound like much, 32nd of an inch or so, which is just be, instead of drilling on the edge of the line instead of the center of the line. So I have to kind of visually look at this and decide, you know, if this is the front radius and this is the back radius, where is the middle? And I've had a little practice, and I just kind of sight this up. It's usually, to me, about 1 3/4 inches between where the front radius starts to fall off and where the back radius is climbing. And I kind of line up a tape measure and I mark the center of it. What you really want to do here is try to be consistent between the 2 sides so you have them the same. So the last visual check I do before I drill these holes and commit to this, which could be terrible if I get it wrong, is I know that this rod end, this heim joint, is going to mount right in here. So I'll take one of the washers and I just drop it on there, and I kind of move it back and forth. And I see that, you know, if I drilled that hole there and I centered it up, does it feel like it's sitting flat in that little flat pocket? And this side feels pretty good. Yep, that side feels good too. Now this is an 1/8 inch bit, and I'm just a little pilot hole. I'm going to drill these out to 7/16, Now the rod end shaft is 3/8, but we want a little bit of play in there because we might have to move them around. Or I might have been a little bit off, as accurate as I try to be. You know, if I'm a 1/16 off and I force them to fit through a 3/8 hole, there's no room and it causes a bind. So I drill the holes a little bit big, gives me plenty of room, everything fits up nice. So this bolts up inside the hood and it uses the factory 2 holes. A lot of people ask us what this hole is, how come I can't figure it out, there's no bolt to go in it. Well, that's right. When we machine these on the CNC, we got to hold it somehow. So we drill that hole in, put a bolt in it, hold it down, and trace around the outside. When the hood comes down as the hinges close in, this little ramp comes down and stops right there. And then as you close the hood, it kind of glides down a roller right there and gets caught in the back. Just like
nice.
that. Now that becomes sort of a safety latch. The hood can't open in the back.
Right.
Because it would have to move this up and down. But since this is loose, you can see that that's how we would adjust the height of the back of the hood.
Oh, right.
To fit real nice is to move this mounting plate up and down,
yeah.
to move the hood around. These two are not marked or labeled. They're a mirror image of one another. One side is countersunk. So if I tried to put this side in, it would be arcing toward the top of the hood. That's backwards. If I line it up with these 2 holes, it's arcing toward the bottom corner of the hood, which is how we want it to be. There's a couple of spacers. There's a small spacer and there's a fat spacer. We've got a countersunk bolt and a small spacer. And since the hood is upside down, remember this is actually the upper bolt. And for the lower hole, we have a large spacer. That drops right in. And right off the bat, I'm noticing that these bolts don't want to thread in. So a moment ago, I took a look at the factory shoulder bolts that came out of the hood, and their threads are kind of damaged. So these threads in here might have been rolled a little bit. So before I force this, I'm just going to remove the 2 bolts. We're going to use a 5/16 fine thread tap. And we're just going to chase the bolt holes. And you can see it didn't take much pressure to do it. I'm going to duplicate that on the other side. That's a final assembly. There's no adjustment, so we tighten them up.
You tighten them now all the way.
Yeah, 15, 20 foot-pounds. So one of the last pieces we have to put onto the hinge assembly is the last 2 rod ends. We've showed these to you a couple of times. And they just bolt into the end of the pivot shaft. It's already threaded. And the hardware goes on backwards, it seems like. First we put on a flat washer and then a lock washer. The lock washer does crush and becomes a lock washer, but it also acts as a spacer for the bearing in the heim. And thread it into the end of the pivot bar and tighten the bolt. Now this bolt we won't be taking back out either, so this can be tightened up for good. Now when it's tight, you want to make sure that the rod end is free to move, but really has no slop in it. It doesn't have any up and down or back force. Good to go. So I'll just repeat the process over here. I got my washers, flat washer first, then the lock washer, through the eye and the rod end. I'll thread it into the pivot bar and tighten up the bolt. Check the motion, good and solid, everything's good. Now, one of our last steps of assembly before we start adjusting is we're actually going to bolt the hood onto the upper valance. So the shaft on the rod end that we just bolted onto the pivot bar is going to drop through these holes that we drilled in the valance. And when you saw it, there were 2 nuts and 2 washers, and the washers are going to sandwich the sheet metal here, one on top and one on the bottom. There'll be 1 nut up against the top and 1 nut up against the bottom. By playing around with those, we can actually adjust that heim and the pivot bar up and down. But when you first put it in, it's tough. So what we do here is we take a little piece of tape and we tape that washer right over the hole so it will stay there. And I have the other washer and nut sitting here waiting to be installed. To put the hood on, it's handy to have a 3rd guy. So we got Matt, he's our ace TIG welder from the other side of the shop.
Hi, Matt.
How's it going?
Those guys, they're going to hold the hood. We're going to pick it up and flip it right side up since it's upside down. And it's tricky to get the 2 shafts of the rod ends to drop through these holes. So as they bring it into position, they can use the ramps on the back of the hood to rest it on the rollers. And then they'll each be holding part of the hood, and I'm going to direct them up, down, side to side, whatnot. I'm going to get it to drop through the holes, and I'll put the hardware on the bottom. Back down. Towards the mat a little bit. This is where you got to use the Yoda magic. You can't see anything. All right, I got that one.
Use the force, bro.
Gravity is the
Enemy.
overwhelming force.
The enemy right now.
So I have the nut started, and what we have is a 9/16 deep socket on just a little very short extension that gives me a little pivot. And that's just long enough to reach up behind the grill panel and get it put on the nut and tighten it up. The hood is just sitting there. It's on the rollers in the back, and it's about to have the spike go through the latch in the front, but it hasn't gone through yet. It's really kind of in an intermediate position. When you're opening the hood, you'll release the latch, and the first thing you're going to do is pull it forward like this till it stops. And there's a mechanical stop in the hinge that doesn't let it come any farther forward. And it'll sit just like that. You know, a lot of guys show them at shows like this, so people can see the engine, but they can't see totally in, and the hood looks like it's floating over the top. Mike is just going to lift this roller plate to a lifted position and snug it up. We really know that it's going to be too high when we close the hood, but we're going to start out with it too high and bring them down, because if we started out too low, it might be in a bind, we might chip the paint, we might cause some sheet metal damage as we're trying to shut the hood. So we just lift them up so where they're too high, and we come over and shut the hood. And we're down in the spike like it should be. Now all in all, doesn't look too bad. This side is just about flush with where it needs to be.
It's a little high.
Okay. This corner is lined up real nice. This is the problem corner that we had, and I really think to fix that, the solution is to take every bolt that holds the front fender on out, and you get a die grinder and whittle it in to bring that fender in. This side is a little bit high. I don't know, maybe an 1/8 or so.
So we're gonna loosen this one up, and we're gonna move the plate down. We think about 1/8 of an inch, and just retighten it. You know, both sides, the height of the hood is, compared to the cowl, is in good shape. Remember, we tightened up the top one good and tight for our adjustment. I'm gonna tighten the bottom one up really snug. Okay, and I'll move inside. These are a lot easier to get to because there's no emergency brake. Tighten the top one. The bottom one, good and snug. Some of these trucks, this edge on the back of the hood points straight down, and it hangs up on the cowl here. You got to remember now, the hood's not going to open up like it did before. It's going to actually pull away from this area. So what we generally do is we take about half the lip off the back of the hood and leave it about 1/4 inch sticking down, and then we after it's rough sanded, go back in and smooth it off. So I'm going to take a big old air sander.
Before you do this, make sure you do exactly what we did and cover your engine compartment and other areas to prevent sparks from hitting it.
Sand this lip. Now that we sanded this edge, it's got a rough edge on the bottom side. So what I'm going to do is go in here and clean it up a little bit. Pull it down just slightly. Norm, close your eyes. You have the proper safety goggles on.
You got it.
All right, switch sides.
Okay. You got
I
it?
got the hood. I got the hood.
All right.
Not bad. You got it.
Good? Nice. All right, so Rob, what's our next step?
Okay, well, I got the last piece to put on, which is a prop rod tab to hold the hood open when you're working on the truck, or you want the hood up.
Yep.
So it's a simple 2-bolt deal, but now I got to put you to work. You need to hold the hood up.
Okay.
Rotate the hood up.
Okay.
About there is cool. You just
Hold
don't
it
want to
here.
let it hit the grill.
Okay.
And then I'm going to take 2 bolts out, the 2 bolts that hold the valance down to the core support. The bracket just lines up over those 2 holes.
Oh, cool.
The prop rod is carried up in the upper hood brace, and when the hood's open, it just gets sprung back,
Oh, nice.
clips in, and that holds the hood when you're working on it or you want to show off the engine. And when you want to close the hood, you just push it back, put it back in the clip.
Nice. All right. Drop this down.
Set it down. And that's it.
Resto Mod 101.